Did people in the Middle Ages even have friends? It seems like a strange question, but we often picture their lives as short, brutal, and focused only on survival. We see images of knights, plagues, and mud. We don't often see two people just talking, sharing a quiet moment. But they did. They thought about friendship deeply. They wrote about it constantly. They saw it as one of the most important things in life, maybe even more important than we do today. They didn't have social media or texting. A letter could take months to reach a friend. So how did they maintain these bonds? What did friendship mean when your world was so small and often so dangerous? They believed friendship wasn't just for fun. It was a path to virtue, a way to get closer to God, a mirror that showed you who you truly were. Some of their ideas might feel strange to us. Others will feel surprisingly modern. They worried about false friends, just like we do. They treasured loyalty and honesty. They knew the pain of losing a friend. Let's look at some of their views. They might just change how you see your own friendships. Number 22. Could a friend be your conscience? We think of our conscience as an inner voice. That little whisper that tells you right from wrong. But what if your conscience could be another person? Someone you trusted completely. This was a powerful idea in the Middle Ages. A true friend wasn't just someone to have a good time with. They were your moral guardian, your external conscience. Think about it. It's easy to lie to yourself. You can rationalize bad behavior. You can convince yourself that what you're doing is okay. But it's much harder to lie to a friend who knows you inside and out. A friend who has your best interests at heart. This is the role they were expected to play. Their job was to hold up a mirror and say, is this really who you want to be? This wasn't seen as nagging or being judgmental. It was seen as the highest form of loyalty. The Cistercian monk Aelred of Rievaulx wrote about this in the 12th century. And his book on spiritual friendship is one of the most important texts on the subject from the period. For Aelred, a friend was a keeper of your soul. If you strayed from the right path, it was your friend's duty to gently guide you back. He writes about the need for correction. This wasn't about punishment, it was about loving guidance. He said a friend should correct you privately, with all gentleness and patience. The goal was to help you become a better person, to help you get closer to God. This was not a suggestion, it was a core function of friendship. This idea wasn't just confined to monasteries. It was part of the fabric of society. In a world without therapists or self-help books, your friend was your sounding board and your moral compass. They helped you navigate the difficult choices in life. This required incredible trust. You had to be vulnerable enough to let someone see your faults, and you had to be brave enough to point out their faults in a loving way. It was a two-way street of mutual improvement. It made friendship a serious, profound commitment. It wasn't just about shared interests, it was about a shared journey toward a better life. But what happens when this kind of honesty goes wrong? If a friend is your conscience, what happens when their conscience conflicts with yours on a fundamental level? And how could you ever be sure your friend was correcting you out of love and not out of a secret desire for control or superiority? At what point does a moral guardian become a judge? Number 21. Did friendship have a patron saint? Today, we have friends for different reasons. A friend for the gym, a friend for deep conversations, a friend from work. We compartmentalize. In the medieval world, they often looked for a single, unifying model for their relationships. And for many, that model was found in the Bible. The story of David and Jonathan in the Old Testament was held up as the perfect example of friendship. Their story, found in the first book of Samuel, is intense. Jonathan was a prince, the son of King Saul. And David was a shepherd boy who became a giant slayer and a hero. By all accounts, they should have been rivals. David was a threat to Jonathan's claim to the throne. But that's not what happened. The Bible says, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. This wasn't a casual bond, it was a deep spiritual connection that transcended politics and self-interest. Jonathan gave David his own robe, his armor, and his weapons. This was a huge symbolic gesture. He was essentially giving away his royal status. He was putting his friend before his own future as king. He repeatedly protected David from his own father, King Saul, who was trying to kill him. He risked his life for his friend. This was the gold standard. This was what every friend should aspire to. Writers and thinkers throughout the Middle Ages return to this story again and again. or Aelred of Rievaulx uses them as a key example in his work on spiritual friendship. He saw their love as pure and selfless. It was a model for how monks should love one another in their communities. But it wasn't just for monks. The story was told in sermons to ordinary people. It was a cultural touchstone. It showed that true friendship required sacrifice. It meant putting your friends' needs before your own. It meant unwavering loyalty even in the face of danger. Their bond was so powerful because it was tested. It wasn't an easy, fair weather friendship. It was forged in conflict and sealed by loyalty. For medieval people, this was the key. A real friendship wasn't one that had never faced a challenge. A real friendship was one that had faced the ultimate challenge and survived. David and Jonathan became, in a way, the unofficial patron saints of friendship. Their story was a blueprint for a perfect, selfless bond, yet the intensity of their relationship has led to centuries of debate. Was their bond purely a platonic, spiritual friendship, or was it something more? How did medieval readers, living in a very different social and religious context, interpret the deep soul-knitted love between these two men? And if this was the ideal, did it create an impossible standard for ordinary people to live up to in their own friendships? Number 20. Was it better to have one friend or many? The debate over quality versus quantity in friendship is not new. We have it today. Is it better to have a few close friends or a large social network? Medieval thinkers wrestled with this same question, but their answers were often more extreme. Most came down firmly on the side of quality. For them, having one true friend was infinitely better than having 100 casual acquaintances. The idea came directly from classical writers like Cicero, whose work on friendship de amicitia was rediscovered and became hugely influential in the 12th century and beyond. Cicero argued that true friendship is rare. It requires such a perfect blend of virtue, loyalty, and understanding that finding it even once in a lifetime is a gift. He famously wrote, "A friend is a second self. How many second selves can a person possibly have?" The logical answer was one, or perhaps a very small, select few. Medieval writers took this idea and ran with it. They saw the world as full of deception. False friends, flatterers, and hangers-on were everywhere. These were people who were friendly to you when you were successful, but who would abandon you at the first sign of trouble. The literature of the time is filled with cautionary tales about the dangers of trusting too many people. A large circle of friends was often seen as a sign of foolishness or vanity. It meant you were easily tricked by flattery. Aelred of Rievaulx echoed this sentiment. He believed that the deepest form of spiritual friendship, the kind that helps you grow closer to God, could only be shared with a very small number of people. He talks about a progression of love. You start with a general love for all humanity creatus, but you move toward a special, focused love for a chosen few. This intense friendship was too demanding, too intimate to be spread thinly among many people. It was a concentrated, powerful force. This wasn't just a philosophical idea. It had practical implications. In a world with a rigid social hierarchy, your choice of friends could have, serious consequences. A friendship with the wrong person could ruin your reputation or even put your life in danger. It was safer and wiser to invest your trust in one or two people who had proven their worth. This made the act of choosing a friend a very serious matter. It wasn't something you did lightly. No, you were choosing someone to entrust with your secrets, your reputation, and your soul. But did this intense focus on a single, perfect friend create a culture of emotional exclusivity and jealousy? If you found your second self, were you then expected to shut everyone else out? And what happened if you lost that one, irreplaceable friend? Did it leave you utterly alone in the world, with no other support system to fall back on? Number 19, could women and men be just friends? This is a question we still ask today. But in the Middle Ages, it was far more complicated and far more dangerous. The official answer, for the most part, was a hard no. The church, which was the dominant cultural and moral authority, was deeply suspicious of any close relationship between a man and a woman who were not married or related. The reasons were simple. The church fathers saw human nature as weak and sinful. The primary danger was lust. They believed that even the most pious man and woman, if they spent too much time alone together, would eventually fall into temptation. Friendship between the sexes was seen as playing with fire. It was a direct path to sin, scandal, and spiritual ruin. Thinkers like Saint Jerome in the 4th century wrote extensively about the need for men, especially clergy, to avoid the company of women to protect their vow of celibacy and their spiritual purity. His views were incredibly influential for the next 1,000 years. The social structure also worked against it. Unmarried men and women simply did not have many opportunities to mix freely. Society was largely segregated by gender. A woman's honor was paramount, and being seen alone with a man who was not her husband or a close relative could destroy her reputation. The whole system of courtly love, which emerged in the High Middle Ages, was in some ways a reaction to this. It created a highly stylized, ritualized way for knights to admire noble ladies from a distance, but it was a game of romance and desire, not platonic friendship. And yet, despite all these barriers, we have evidence that real platonic friendships did exist. The most famous example is the relationship between Peter Abelard, a 12th century philosopher, and Heloise, his brilliant student. Their story is tragic. They began as teacher and students. Their intellectual connection blossomed into a passionate love affair, which led to a secret marriage, a child, and ultimately, a violent and tragic separation. But what's fascinating is their correspondence years later, after he was a monk and she was a nun. Their letters are a testament to a deep, enduring bond that had transformed from romantic love into a profound, if painful, spiritual friendship. They still valued each other's minds and souls even after their physical relationship was over. They were trying to build a new kind of connection within the strict rules of their religious lives. So, while the official doctrine was one of prohibition and suspicion, human nature found a way. These friendships were rare. They were risky. They required a careful navigation of social and religious rules. But they show that the desire for intellectual and emotional connection between men and women is not a modern invention. It was there, struggling to exist, even in the most restrictive of times. But how many other stories like Abelard and Heloise's have been lost to history because they were too dangerous to record? Were these rare friendships seen by their peers as inspiring examples of platonic love or as scandalous failures of self-control? And did the constant fear of sin actually make it impossible for a friendship between a man and a woman to ever be truly equal and free from suspicion? Number 18 was friendship a way to climb the social ladder. We like to think of friendship as something pure, separate from ambition, but let's be honest. In the medieval world, who you knew was everything, society was a rigid hierarchy of kings, lords, knights, and peasants. There was very little social mobility. One of the few ways to improve your station was through personal connections. Friendship, in this context, was a powerful political and social tool. This was the world of patronage. A powerful lord or bishop would take a promising young man under his wing. This relationship might be framed in the language of friendship, but it was also a transaction. The patron provided opportunities, protection, and advancement. The client, in return, offered loyalty, service, and support. This wasn't necessarily seen as cynical, it was just how the world worked. It was a system of mutual obligation. Look at the life of John of Salisbury in the 12th century. He was a brilliant scholar of humble origins. He rose to become the secretary to 2 archbishops of Canterbury, including Thomas Becket, and eventually became the Bishop of Chartres. How did he do it? Through his intellect, yes, but also through his incredible ability to build and maintain a network of powerful friends. His letters are a masterclass in networking. He knew who to write to, what to say, and how to ask for favors while offering his own skills in return. His friendships were genuine, but they were also strategic. They were the rungs on the ladder he climbed. This kind of instrumental friendship was not hidden or shameful. It was openly acknowledged, and manuals were written for courtiers on how to win the favor of the prince. The advice often revolved around how to cultivate a friendship with the ruler. This meant being a good conversationalist, offering wise counsel, and showing unwavering loyalty. The goal was to become an indispensable companion. The rewards could be immense land, titles, wealth, and power. The risks were also immense. If your powerful friend fell from grace, you fell with him. The friendship between Thomas Becket and King Henry II is a prime example. They were once the closest of companions, but when their political and religious duties came into conflict, their friendship shattered, ending in Becket's murder. So was this real friendship? It's a difficult question. These relationships could involve genuine affection and loyalty, but they were always shaped by the realities of power. The friend who was also your social superior always held the upper hand. The friendship was never truly between equals. It was a complex mix of personal feeling and practical calculation. It shows that friendship has never existed in a vacuum. It is always intertwined with the social and political structures of its time. But did anyone in the medieval period ever call out this system as corrupt or inauthentic? Was there a clear line between a strategic friendship and outright sycophancy? And could a person who rose to power through such friendships ever really trust that their own friends were genuine? Or were they constantly afraid that they were just being used in turn? Number 17, did you have to be a good person to be a good friend? Can two bad people be good friends? Can a thief be a loyal friend to another thief? Our modern instinct might be to say yes. We see it in movies all the time, the band of honorable outlaws, loyal to each other even as they break the law. But for most medieval thinkers, the answer was a clear and resounding no. True friendship could only exist between good people. This idea came straight from the classical world, particularly from Aristotle and Cicero. Aristotle, in his Nicomachean Ethics, laid it all out. He identified three types of friendship. The first is friendship based on utility. These are friends who are useful to each other. Think of business partners. The second is friendship based on pleasure. These are friends you have fun with. But both of these are unstable. When the utility or the pleasure disappears, the friendship ends. The third, and only true, form of friendship is what he called the friendship of the good. This is a bond between two people who admire and love each other for their character. They are friends because they are both virtuous people. They wish good things for each other for the other's sake, not for any personal gain. This kind of friendship is rare and takes a long time to develop, but it is also lasting. And medieval Christian writers absorbed this idea and gave it a theological spin. For them, good meant living a virtuous Christian life. A true friend was someone who helped you on your path to God. Therefore, a friendship between two sinners who encouraged each other's bad habits was not a friendship at all. It was a conspiracy, it was a partnership in vice. Thomas Aquinas, the towering philosopher of the 13th century, built upon Aristotle's framework. He argued that since all goodness ultimately comes from God, the highest form of friendship is one rooted in the shared love of God. This is caritas, or charity. A friendship not based on this shared love was, at best, a pale imitation of the real thing. This creates a very high bar for friendship. It means you can't just be friends with someone because you like them or have a good time with them. You have to judge their character. You have to ask yourself, is this person virtuous? Is this person helping me become a better person? This made the choice of a friend a profound moral decision. To choose a bad friend was to choose a path away from virtue, away from God. The popular 14th century text, the Gesta Romanorum, a collection of tales and fables used by preachers, is full of stories illustrating this point, where friendships with wicked people lead to disaster and ruin. But is this realistic? Can anyone ever be perfectly virtuous? If true friendship can only exist between the good, does that mean that most people are incapable of ever having a true friend? And what about the power of friendship to redeem someone? Could a good person, by befriending a bad person, actually help them to become better? Or was this seen as a foolish and dangerous risk? Number 16, how did you show someone you were their friend? Without phone calls, texts, or social media posts, how did you maintain a friendship? In the medieval period, friendship was demonstrated through concrete actions. It wasn't just a feeling, it was something you did. Words were important, but they had to be backed up by deeds. Three things stood out: letter writing, gift giving, and simply being present. Letter writing was the primary way to maintain a long-distance friendship, but these were not like our quick emails or texts. A letter was a major undertaking. Paper or parchment was expensive. Ink had to be prepared. Writing itself was a skill that not everyone possessed, and then there was the delivery. There was no public postal service. You had to find a reliable traveler, a merchant, or a messenger going in the right direction. A letter could take weeks or months to arrive, if it arrived at all. Because of this, every letter was precious. It was a tangible piece of the person who sent it. The letters between scholars and monks of the time, like those of Anselm of Canterbury in the 11th century, are filled with deep expressions of affection and longing. They talk about missing their friend's presence, their voice, their counsel. The act of writing and sending the letter was a powerful declaration of the friendship's importance. Gift giving was also central, but again, this wasn't casual. A gift was a symbol of the bond. It wasn't about the monetary value, but the meaning. A knight might give his friend a prized falcon or a sword. A scholar might send a hand-copied book. a project that could take months of painstaking work. These gifts were extensions of the self. They created a sense of mutual obligation and connection. The 12th century writer Andreas Capellanus, in his book The Art of Courtly Love, even outlines the types of gifts appropriate to give, showing how formalized the practice could be. The gift said, "I am thinking of you, and I value our connection," but perhaps the most important act was simply being together. The medieval ideal of friendship often involved shared living. Monks in a monastery, knights in a household, students at a university. Friendship was built on shared meals, shared work, shared prayer, and endless conversation. Aelred of Rievaulx writes beautifully about the simple joy of sitting with a friend and talking, to consult with him about everything, to share with him your plans and your thoughts. In a world that was often harsh and isolating, the physical presence of a friend was a source of immense comfort and strength. It was the ultimate proof of the bond. When a friend was sick, you sat with them. When they were in trouble, you stood by their side. It was that simple and that profound. But how did they navigate the etiquette of gift-giving? Was it possible to refuse a gift without causing offense? And did an expensive gift create an uncomfortable debt? In a world of slow and uncertain communication, how did friends deal with the anxiety of not hearing from each other for months on end? Did they assume the worst, or did they have a different sense of time and presence than we do? Number 15 was friendship a legal contract? Today, friendship is an informal, private arrangement. We don't sign documents or swear oaths in front of witnesses. But in the Middle Ages, some friendships were made into formal, public, and binding pacts. The most dramatic example of this was sworn brotherhood, or fraternitas iurata. This was a ritual where two men would formally swear an oath to be brothers. This wasn't just a metaphor. They were creating a bond that was meant to be as strong, or even stronger, than a blood relationship. These ceremonies often took place in a church in front of a priest. The men would swear on the Bible or a holy relic to support each other for life. The terms of the oath could be very specific. They might promise to share their possessions, to defend each other in battle, and crucially to avenge the other's death if he were killed. This was a deadly serious commitment. This practice had deep roots in Germanic and Norse cultures. Think of the blood brother rituals of the Vikings, and it was carried into the medieval period, especially within the warrior aristocracy. The epics and romances of the time are filled with examples. In the French epic The Song of Roland, the friendship between Roland and Oliver is the emotional core of the story. They are perfect companions in arms. Their loyalty to each other is absolute. This literary ideal reflected a social reality for the knightly class. In a world of constant warfare and shifting allegiances, having a sworn brother you could trust with your life was an invaluable asset. The historian Alan Bray, in his groundbreaking book The Friend, has shown just how widespread and significant these pacts were. He found evidence of specific church liturgies for blessing these unions. These were not secret fringe rituals. They were a recognized part of the social fabric. The bond was so strong that in some legal codes, the sworn brother had inheritance rights, just like a family member. Betraying a sworn brother was one of the most shameful acts a man could commit. This formalizes friendship to a degree that is almost unimaginable to us. It takes it out of the realm of private feeling and places it in the public sphere of law, religion, and honor. It says that this bond is so important that the whole community must recognize and respect it. It makes the friendship a cornerstone of social order, not just a personal preference. It was a way of creating family when blood family was not enough. But what happened when a sworn oath to a friend conflicted with an oath to a king or a feudal lord? Which bond was supposed to be stronger, and could these intensely male-only pacts be dissolved? If so, what was the process for a formal friendship divorce? More shockingly, given that these ceremonies so closely mirrored marriage rights, how did the church and society distinguish them from same-sex unions? Number 14, could your friend be a mirror? Know thyself. This ancient Greek maxim was just as important to medieval thinkers. But how do you get to know yourself? You can't see your own face without a mirror. In the same way, they believed you can't truly know your own character, your own soul, without a friend. The friend was the mirror of the soul. This powerful metaphor appears again and again in medieval writing. The idea is that a true friend reflects you back to yourself, but not just as you are. They reflect who you could be. They see your potential, your virtues, even when you can't see them yourself. When you are feeling lost or full of self-doubt, A friend reminds you of your own goodness. Peter of Blois, a 12th century writer, put it beautifully. The friend's face is a sweet mirror. Looking at your friend, you see your better self. But the mirror doesn't just show the good things. A real mirror shows everything, including the flaws. This goes back to the idea of the friend as a conscience. A true friend will gently show you your faults. They will reflect your anger, your pride, or your selfishness back at you so that you can see it and correct it. This required immense trust. You had to believe that the reflection was honest and offered out of love, not malice. A flatterer, a false friend, was like a distorted funhouse mirror. They would only show you a pleasing but false image of yourself. A true friend was like a clear, polished mirror showing you the truth. This concept gave friendship a profound psychological and spiritual purpose. The relationship wasn't just about companionship, it was a tool for self-discovery and self-improvement. Through conversation with a friend, by sharing your deepest thoughts and fears, you came to understand yourself better. Your friend's perspective helped you see your own life more clearly. Cicero, whose influence we've already seen, wrote that in a friend, a person beholds, as it were, a copy of himself. This meant that by studying your friend's virtuous character, you had a model to imitate in your own life. This idea is deeply embedded in monastic culture. For monks living in a close-knit community, their brothers were their mirrors. Through daily interaction, confession, and mutual correction, they were supposed to help each other polish their souls, to rub away the imperfections, so they could better reflect the image of God. Friendship was the workshop where this soul polishing took place. It was a shared project of becoming better human beings. But what if the mirror is flawed? If your friend has a distorted view of you, or of reality, does their reflection lead you astray? And is there a danger of losing your own identity in this process of becoming merely a copy of your friend rather than a second self? At what point does looking to a friend for self-knowledge become an unhealthy dependence on their approval? Number 13 was friendship more important than family. In our modern world, we often hear the phrase, friends are the family you choose. This idea would have been both familiar and radical to someone in the Middle Ages. Family, or kin, was the absolute bedrock of society. Your family determined your social status, your wealth, your profession, and your loyalties. Blood was thicker than water. Feuds between families could last for generations. Your first and most important duty was to your kin. And yet, there was a powerful countercurrent of thought that elevated friendship above even these sacred blood ties. This was a radical idea. It suggested that a bond you choose, a bond of the spirit, could be more meaningful and more binding than a bond you are born into. Again, the classical influence is key. Aristotle argued that friendship, based on virtue, is superior to kinship. Family relationships are often based on obligation and accident of birth. You don't choose your brother, but you choose your friend. This choice, this act of will based on mutual admiration of character, made the bond of friendship a higher, more rational, and more noble connection. Christianity complicated this in fascinating ways. On the one hand, the Ten Commandments instructed believers to honor thy father and thy mother. But Jesus himself said things that challenged the primacy of family. In the Gospel of Matthew, when he is told his mother and brothers are waiting for him, he gestures to his disciples and says, "Here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." This was a revolutionary statement. It defined family not by blood, but by shared faith and spiritual purpose. This idea was taken to its logical conclusion in monasticism. When a man became a monk, he left his biological family behind. He took a vow of poverty, renouncing his inheritance. His new family was the community of monks. His brothers were the other men in the monastery. The bonds of spiritual friendship within the monastery were supposed to replace the bonds of blood. Aelred of Rievaulx explicitly argues that spiritual friendship is a higher calling than natural family affection. It is a chosen, rational love directed toward God, while family love is an instinctual, natural affection. This created a real tension in society. For the nobility, where bloodlines and inheritance were everything, this was a difficult concept. Yet, even in the world of knights and lords, the ideal of the sworn brother sometimes challenged family loyalty. The epics are full of heroes forced to choose between their duty to their king or family and their loyalty to their friend. The choice they make reveals their true character. Friendship was a voluntary spiritual kinship that could, in the most profound cases, trump the involuntary kinship of blood. But how often did this ideal clash with the practical reality of inheritance and family alliances? When a lord died, did his sworn brother have a stronger claim to his property than his own blood relatives, and what kind of conflicts did this cause? And for the vast majority of people, the peasants who lived and worked in tight family units, was this elevation of friendship over kin even a meaningful concept, or was it an elite preoccupation? Number 12, how did a friendship end? We have lots of language for the end of a romantic relationship: breakup, divorce, separation. We have very little for the end of a friendship. It often just fades away in ambiguity. In the Middle Ages, because friendship was seen as a more formal and serious commitment, its ending was also treated as a serious matter. And it could end for very specific reasons. The primary reason a friendship had to end was a betrayal of trust. This was the unforgivable sin. A friend who revealed your secrets, who slandered you behind your back, or who abandoned you in a time of need had broken the sacred pact. This wasn't just a personal hurt, it was a moral failure. Because friendship was based on virtue, a friend who acted without virtue had proven that the friendship was a sham from the start. Aelred of Rievaulx is very clear on this. He lists things like insults and arrogance as damaging to a friendship, but the revealing of a secret is what truly drives a friend away. Another major reason for ending a friendship was a divergence in moral character. If you were trying to live a virtuous life and your friends started down a path of vice, you had a duty to end the relationship. This wasn't about being judgmental, it was about self-preservation. Remember, friends were seen as a powerful influence on your character. To continue a friendship with someone who was becoming a bad person was to risk being corrupted yourself. And Thomas Aquinas, following Aristotle, argued that if a friend becomes wicked and there is no hope for his reform, you must dissolve the bond. Your primary duty is to your own soul. But how was this done? It wasn't usually a dramatic confrontation. It was a gradual, deliberate withdrawal. You would stop seeking out their company. You would stop sharing your thoughts and secrets. It was a managed cooling of the relationship. In a small community like a monastery or a village, this would have been very visible and very difficult. It was a public statement. The opposite of a true friend was the flatterer. Medieval writers were obsessed with the figure of the flatterer, the false friend, who only tells you what you want to hear in order to gain some advantage. The 12th century philosopher and poet Bernard of Cluny wrote scathingly about these figures. Discovering that someone you thought was a friend was actually a flatterer was a common reason for a friendship to end. The moment the mask slipped and the true self-serving motive was revealed, the friendship was over. It was like discovering the whole relationship had been built on a lie. But what if the betrayal was unintentional, a mistake made in a moment of weakness? Was there a path to forgiveness and reconciliation, or was the bond considered permanently broken? And in a world that so valued loyalty, was the act of ending a friendship, even for good moral reasons, ever seen as a form of disloyalty in itself? How did you distinguish between prudently separating from a bad influence and callously abandoning a friend who was struggling? Number 11, was friendship a kind of love? Yes, absolutely. But the word love had a much broader and more complex meaning in the Middle Ages than it often does for us today. We tend to equate love with romance. For them, love amor in Latin was a vast spectrum of feeling and relationship. Friendship was not just like love, it was a specific and very high form of it. Medieval thinkers, drawing on Greek philosophy, often distinguished between different kinds of love. There was eros, romantic or sexual love, storge, familial affection, and philia, the love between friends. But Christian theology added another supreme category, caritas or agape. This was selfless, unconditional, divine love, the love God has for humanity, and the love humans should have for God and for each other. The great project for many medieval writers on friendship was to figure out how philia friendship related to caritas, divine love. The most influential view was that true friendship was an expression of caritas. It was a way of participating in God's love. When you loved your friends selflessly, you were practicing the kind of love that God commanded. This elevated friendship from a mere social pleasure to a sacred duty. Aelred of Rievaulx goes even further. His famous phrase is, God is friendship. He believed that the experience of true spiritual friendship was a direct experience of the divine. In the loving union of two souls you could catch a glimpse of the loving union that is the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This is a breathtakingly high view of friendship. It makes it a mystical experience, a form of prayer. He writes, "And so, from friendship, we ascend to the love and knowledge of God. The path to heaven ran directly through the heart of a friend. This meant that the love and friendship had to be pure. It had to be free from selfishness, from lust, and from the desire for personal gain. It was a love focused on the soul of the other person. You loved your friend not for what they could do for you, but simply for who they were, a being created in the image of God." This is why medieval writers were so careful to distinguish this pure love from the turbulence of romantic love, or eros. While romantic love was often seen as a dangerous, irrational passion that could lead you astray, the love of a friend was a calm, rational, and steadying force that led you toward virtue. So, when medieval men wrote letters to each other filled with passionate declarations of love, using language that might sound romantic to our ears, they were operating within this framework. They were speaking of a deep spiritual love, a soul love, that they considered one of the most profound experiences life had to offer. But was the line between friendly love, philia, and romantic love, eros, always so clear in practice? Despite the theological framework, did these intense, loving friendships ever tip over into something more complicated? And by defining the Hest form of love as completely non-physical, did these thinkers devalue the role of the body in human affection in creating and sustaining bonds? Number 10, could you be friends with God? This might seem like a strange, even blasphemous question. How can a mere mortal be friends with an all-powerful, all-knowing, infinite God? And yet, for many medieval mystics and theologians, this was the ultimate goal of the spiritual life. And friendship with God was not just possible, it was the entire point. The foundation for this idea came from the Bible itself. In the Old Testament, Abraham is called the friend of God. James chapter 2, verse 23. In the New Testament, Jesus says to his disciples, "I no longer call you servants. Instead, I have called you friends." John chapter 15, verse 15. These were powerful verses. They suggested that the relationship between humanity and God was not just one of a creature to its creator or a subject to its king. It could be one of intimacy, trust, and mutual love. This concept was developed by many thinkers, but it reached a peak in the 12th and 13th centuries, particularly in the mystical traditions. Bernard of Clairvaux, a Cistercian abbot, wrote about the soul's journey as a movement from being a servant of God to a son of God, and finally to a friend, or even a bride of God. Friendship represented a stage of mature, intimate love. A servant obeys out of fear. A son obeys out of duty. But a friend acts out of a free and joyful love. What did it mean to be God's friend? It meant talking to him honestly and openly in prayer, just as you would talk to a human friend. It meant sharing your deepest thoughts, your fears, and your joys. It meant trusting that God had your best interests at heart, even in times of suffering. It also meant striving to love what God loves, namely goodness, justice, and mercy. A friend, after all, shares the same values as their friend. This idea transformed the practice of prayer. It was no longer just about reciting formal prayers or asking for things. Prayer became a conversation between friends. The mystics of the period, like Julian of Norwich or Richard Rowley in England, wrote about their personal, emotional experiences of God's presence. Their writings are filled with the language of intimacy and affection. They experience God not as a distant, abstract concept, but as a loving, present companion. This idea democratized spirituality in a way. You didn't have to be a great theologian or a powerful bishop to be a friend of God. Any person, no matter their station in life, could cultivate this intimate relationship through prayer, contemplation, and living a virtuous life. It made the divine accessible. God wasn't just a judge to be feared, but a friend to be loved. But if God is your friend, does that imply a relationship between equals? And isn't that theologically problematic? How did they reconcile the intimacy of friendship with the infinite distance between the human and the divine? And could this idea be dangerous, leading to a kind of spiritual arrogance where an individual might feel their personal friendship with God allowed them to ignore the teachings and authority of the church? Number 9, what was the biggest threat to friendship? If you asked a medieval thinker to name the single greatest enemy of friendship, they probably wouldn't say betrayal or distance or even death. They would say flattery. They were obsessed with the danger of the flatterer, the person who pretends to be your friend but is secretly using you. Why was this so terrifying? Because it poisoned the very foundation of friendship truth. A true friend, as we've seen, was a mirror. They told you the truth for your own good. A flatterer does the opposite. They tell you only what you want to hear. They praise your vices as if they were virtues. They agree with your foolish plans. They build up your ego. The 12th century scholar Peter of Blois wrote a whole treatise on friendship and distinguished it sharply from flattery, which he called its apy or cheap imitation. A flatterer mimics the gestures of friendship but lacks its substance. The danger was that flattery is seductive. It it feels good to be praised. It's much more pleasant than being corrected. A person, especially a powerful person like a king or a lord, could easily become surrounded by flatterers. These sycophants would isolate the ruler from the truth, leading him to make terrible decisions. The political philosopher John of Salisbury, in his book Polycraticus, warned that flatterers were a poison in the body politic. They were more dangerous than an open enemy. An enemy attacks you from the front. A flatterer destroys you with a smile and a kind word. This fear was everywhere in medieval culture. It appears in sermons, in poems, in moral tales. The figure of the smooth-talking, deceitful courtier is a common stock character. He is the one who whispers in the king's ear, turning him against his true and honest friends. This is because the medieval world understood that self-knowledge was difficult. It was easy to become blind to your own faults. The flatterer exploits this weakness. They confirm your self-deceptions, they make you comfortable in your ignorance. In doing so, they not only prevent you from becoming a better person, but they can lead you to your own ruin. So, how did you guard against flattery? You had to cultivate a love for the truth, even when it was painful. You had to seek out and treasure the friends who were willing to challenge you, the ones who weren't afraid to tell you that you were wrong. You had to be suspicious of easy praise. In a way, the friend who occasionally angered you or hurt your feelings with the difficult truth was the one you could trust the most. Their willingness to risk your displeasure was the proof of their genuine care for your well-being. But how could a person ever be completely sure of a friend's motives? Is there any foolproof way to distinguish sincere praise from cunning flattery? And did this pervasive fear of flatterers create a culture of paranoia, where it was difficult to accept any compliment or kindness at face value? Number 8, did all friendships have to be serious? So far, we've talked about friendship as a path to God, a moral contract, a mirror to the soul. It all sounds very serious, very solemn. But did people in the Middle Ages ever have friends just for fun? Did they ever just sit around and laugh? Of course they did. Alongside the high-minded philosophical and theological ideals, there was a robust appreciation for the simple joy and pleasure of companionship. Even the most serious writers acknowledge this. Cicero, the great Roman model, admitted that a key ingredient of friendship is delight or charm. He writes that life without friends would be no life at all. Aelred of Rievaulx, for all his focus on spiritual growth, describes friendship as a solace in this life. He says a friend is someone to whom you can fearlessly entrust your heart and all its secrets. There is a sense of comfort, rest, and relief in his writing. Friendship was a refuge from the hardships of the world. We can see this lighter side of friendship in the literature of the time. Think of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, written in the late 14th century. The whole premise is a group of diverse people on a pilgrimage, telling stories to pass the time. There is teasing, joking, and a real sense of camaraderie, or think of the relationship between Sir Gawain and the other knights of the Round Table in the Arthurian legends. Yes, they were bound by a solemn code of chivalry, but they also feasted together, hunted together, and shared an adventure. Their bond was forged in shared experience and good humor as much as in battle. Even in the monasteries, which we picture as silent and austere, there was room for laughter. Monastic rules often set aside specific times and places for recreation, where monks could talk and relax together. They understood that a community could not function on prayer and labor alone. Human beings need moments of levity and easy companionship. This friendship of pleasure, as Aristotle would call it, was not seen as the highest or most durable form of friendship. The moralists were always quick to warn that a friendship based only on fun would not last. When the fun stopped, the friendship would end. But that didn't mean it had no value. It was a good and necessary part of a full life. It provided the emotional support and happiness that made the hard work of spiritual and moral improvement possible. You couldn't spend every waking moment having profound discussions about the nature of virtue. Sometimes you just needed to share a drink and a laugh with someone you liked. This simple pleasure was also a gift from God. But was there a moral panic about having too much fun with friends? Where did preachers and moralists draw the line between harmless recreation and sinful indulgence? And in a society with such a strong sense of social hierarchy, was it possible for people of different classes to form these friendships of pleasure, or was fun strictly segregated by social status? Number 7, could friendship save your soul? We've seen that friendship could help you become a better person, but could it go even further than that? Could it actually be a necessary ingredient for salvation? For some medieval thinkers, particularly in the monastic tradition, the answer was yes. A spiritual life lived in complete isolation was seen as not only difficult, but dangerous. You needed a friend to get to heaven. The logic went like this. The greatest spiritual dangers are pride and despair. Pride is the sin of thinking you are self-sufficient, that you don't need anyone's help, not even God's. Despair is the sin of believing you are so wicked that you are beyond saving. Friendship was the direct antidote to both. How did it fight pride? A true spiritual friend, as we've seen, was your mirror and your conscience. They would not let your ego get out of control. They would gently point out your faults, keeping you humble. By needing a friend, by admitting your weaknesses to them and asking for their help and counsel, you were practicing humility. You were admitting that you couldn't do it all on your own. This humility was the essential first step on the path to God. The hermit who lived alone in the desert might be holy, but he was also at constant risk of spiritual pride, of believing his holiness was his own achievement. How did it fight despair? When you fell into sin or felt overwhelmed by your own failings, it was easy to fall into despair. You could feel isolated, alone, and convinced that God had abandoned you. This is when a friend was most crucial. A friend would come to you and offer comfort and encouragement. They would remind you of God's mercy. They would pray for you and with you. They would, in the words of the Bible, bear one another's burdens. The 11th century abbot Anselm of Canterbury's letters are full of this kind of mutual support. He writes to his friends, urging them not to give up, reassuring them of God's love, and promising them his prayers. The friend was a living, breathing sign of God's grace, present right when you needed it most. Aelred of Rievaulx makes the connection explicit. He structures his whole book on spiritual friendship as a journey. And it starts with two people finding each other, moves through the stages of testing and proving the friendship, and culminates in a union so close that Christ himself is present with them. He quotes Jesus' words from the Gospel of Matthew, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I among them." For Aelred, a true spiritual friendship was literally a gathering in Christ's name. And Christ was the third partner in the relationship. Therefore, to be in a state of true friendship was to be in the presence of Christ. And to be in the presence of Christ was to be on the path to salvation. But what did this mean for people who, through circumstance or temperament, did not have a close spiritual friend? Was their salvation genuinely in greater jeopardy? Did this idea create a kind of spiritual clique-ishness within monasteries, where those who were part of a strong friendship pair were seen as more holy than those who were not? And if a friend could lead you to salvation, could a false friend lead you to damnation? Number 6, what did friendship look like for women? Most of the famous texts we've been discussing, from Cicero, Aelred, Aquinas, were written by men, for men, and about men's friendships. The world of the monastery, the university, and the royal court was overwhelmingly male. So what about women? Did they have friends, and what did their friendships look like? The historical record is much quieter on this subject. Women's lives were more private, and they were far less likely to be literate. The letters and treatises that form the bulk of our evidence for male friendships simply don't exist in the same quantity for women. But this doesn't mean female friendships weren't important. We just have to look for the evidence in different places. We can see it in religious communities of women. Convents, like monasteries, were places where deep spiritual friendships could form. Women who entered a convent left their families behind and formed a new spiritual family with their sisters in Christ. We have letters from some medieval nuns, like the 12th century German abbess Hildegard of Bingen, that show her deep and affectionate bonds with other women in her community. They supported each other in their spiritual lives, collaborated on projects, and provided emotional comfort. Outside the convent, friendships often formed within family and neighborhood networks. Women's lives revolved around the household. They worked together, raised children together, and supported each other through illness and childbirth. These were friendships born of shared experience and mutual aid. They might not have been writing philosophical treatises about it, but the loyalty and support were just as real. One of the most important voices on this topic is Christine de Pizan, a remarkable writer from the late 14th and early 15th centuries. In her book, The Book of the City of Ladies, she builds a metaphorical city to house and defend virtuous women throughout history. The whole project is an act of solidarity. She writes to counter the rampant misogyny of male writers of her time. In her book, she emphasizes the importance of women supporting each other, learning from each other, and defending each other's reputations. She saw female friendship and community as a crucial defense against a hostile world. She was arguing for a kind of sisterhood. The nature of women's friendships was inevitably shaped by their social roles. Because women's lives were more circumscribed, their friendships were often more focused on the domestic and the local. But this doesn't make them less profound. The bond between a mother and a daughter, between sisters, or between neighbors could be a source of immense strength and emotional sustenance in a world that offered women few other outlets. But is the lack of written evidence a sign that female friendships were considered less important by society at large, or just a reflection of women's lower literacy rates? Did the intense focus on a woman's chastity and reputation make it difficult for them to form close friendships outside of their own family? And were there equivalents of sworn sisterhoods for women, or were such formal pacts an exclusively male privilege? Number 5, did you have to be equals to be friends? Can a king be true friends with a stable boy? Can a rich merchant be friends with a poor artisan? The medieval world was defined by its rigid social hierarchy. Everyone had a specific place. This created a huge barrier to the kind of easy, equal friendship we value today. Most medieval thinkers would have said that true, perfect friendship can only exist between equals. This idea comes once again from Aristotle. For him, the friendship of the good required two people of similar virtue and similar social standing. Why? Because friendship involves a kind of sharing thoughts, sharing time, sharing life. If there is a vast gap in wealth or power between two people, this sharing becomes difficult. The relationship can easily slip into one of patronage, where the superior person gives and the inferior person receives. It creates an imbalance. The relationship is no longer about mutual affection for each other's character, but about the utility the powerful person can provide. We see this tension in the stories and manuals for courtiers. The goal was to become a friend of the prince, but everyone knew this was not a friendship of equals. The prince always had the power. He could raise you up, and he could cast you down. The friend had to be constantly careful not to overstep his bounds, not to seem too familiar. The 12th century writer Walter Map collected stories of court life, and they are full of tales of favorites who rose too high, forgot their place, and suffered a terrible fall. The friendship was conditional on maintaining the proper deference. However, there was a powerful Christian ideal that pushed back against this. Christianity taught that all people are equal in the eyes of God. In Christ, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female. Galatians chapter 3, verse 28. This spiritual equality was supposed to transcend earthly hierarchies. This ideal was most fully realized in the monastery. A man who entered a monastery was supposed to leave his worldly status at the door. A nobleman who became a monk was, in theory, no better than a peasant who became a monk. They were all brothers, equal in their service to God. Aelred of Rievaulx insisted that friendship in the monastery should be blind to former social rank. The only thing that mattered was a person's virtue and their commitment to the spiritual life. This was a radical vision of community in a deeply stratified world. Of course, reality did not always live up to this ideal. Even within monasteries, men from powerful families often rose to positions of leadership more quickly. But the ideal was there. It held out the possibility of a relationship based on soul quality rather than social status. It was a small pocket of spiritual egalitarianism in an unequal world. But how often was the Christian ideal of spiritual equality actually practiced outside the monastery walls? Could a lord and a peasant truly be friends? And what would that relationship have looked like to their neighbors? Did the powerful ever use the language of friendship to manipulate and control their social inferiors, making their power seem more benign than it really was? Number 4, did friendship prepare you for heaven? We've seen that friendship could be a path to God, but some medieval writers went even further. They saw earthly friendship as a kind of training ground, a school for the love that you would experience in heaven. The skills you learned in a good friendship, loyalty, empathy, selflessness, honest communication, were the very skills you would need for an eternity in the presence of God and the saints. This idea connects the present life with the life to come. What you do here and how you love here directly prepares you for what you will be doing and how you will be loving there. Aelred of Rievaulx is, again, our best guide here. He believed that the joy of being with a friend was a foretaste of the joy of heaven. Heaven, in his view, was not a solitary experience of contemplating God. It was a community, a city of saints, bound together in a perfect, universal friendship, all united in their shared love of God. So, how did earthly friendship prepare you for this? First, it taught you to love someone other than yourself. It broke you out of the prison of selfishness. Second, it taught you to love another person for their inner qualities, for their soul, rather than for superficial reasons. This is the kind of love that would exist in heaven, where worldly status and physical appearance would no longer matter. Third, it created a union of hearts and minds. Aelred wrote that when two friends become one, they have one soul and two bodies. This unity was a small-scale model of the perfect unity of all the saved in heaven. This made earthly friendships incredibly precious, but also provisional. They were beautiful and important, but they were not the final goal. They were a signpost pointing towards something greater. The love you felt for your friend was real, but it was just a shadow of the perfect love you would experience in the heavenly community. This is why Aelred could write so movingly about the pain of losing a friend to death, but also with a sense of hope. The friendship was not over, it was merely interrupted. He looked forward to a joyful reunion in heaven, where the friendship would be perfected, free from all the misunderstandings, separations, and sorrows of this world. This view gave suffering and loss a new meaning. The grief you felt at a friend's death was a measure of the love you shared. But that love, if it was a true spiritual friendship, was eternal. The bond was not broken by death. It was a promise of a future, more perfect union. It turned friendship into a deeply eschatological practice and an activity that is fundamentally oriented toward the end times and the life to come. But if earthly friendship is just a training ground, does that diminish its importance in the here and now? Could this view lead to a devaluing of our human relationships in favor of a future heavenly ideal? And what about friendships that were not explicitly spiritual? Did they have any value in this framework, or were they considered a waste of time in the grand scheme of salvation? Number 3, could you trust your friend with everything? Trust is the foundation of any friendship. But how far did that trust extend in the medieval world? The ideal was absolute. A true friend was someone to whom you could unburden your soul completely, without any fear of judgment or betrayal. They were the keeper of your secrets. The language used to describe this is powerful. Aelred speaks of pouring your heart into your friend's heart, as if into a vessel. The friend becomes a safe container for your most private thoughts, fears, and failings. In a world without formal therapy, the friend was the confessor. This was especially important in the monastic context. Monks were engaged in a constant struggle against sin, and they needed to be able to speak openly about their temptations and failures. A trusted friend was a vital part of this process of self-examination and spiritual growth. The secret was safe with them. To betray that trust, to reveal a secret, was the ultimate act of treachery. It was considered the death of the friendship. This ideal of total trust was also central to the world of politics and court life, though it was much more dangerous there. A king needed a counselor he could trust absolutely, someone with whom he could discuss his plans and his doubts without fearing they would be used against him. This friend counselor was supposed to be the one person who would tell the king the unvarnished truth. The tragedy of many a medieval king, at least in the literature, was his inability to distinguish this true friend from the flatterers who surrounded him. The story of King Lear and his loyal but banished friend, the Earl of Kent, is a later but powerful dramatization of this very theme. But this ideal of total transparency came with a major caveat. The trust was conditional on the friend being virtuous. You were not supposed to trust a friend with a secret plan to commit a crime or a sin. Your friend's duty was to guide you toward virtue, not to be your accomplice in vice. If you confided in a friend that you were planning something wicked, their responsibility was not to keep your secret, but to talk you out of your plan. Their loyalty was to your soul, not to your sinful desires. This put the friend in a difficult position, having to balance the duty of confidentiality with the duty of moral correction. So the ideal was one of complete trust, but it was a trust circumscribed by morality. You could trust your friend with your weaknesses, your sorrows, and your legitimate plans. But you could not expect them to be a partner in crime. The bond was sacred, but it was a bond in the service of goodness. Any secret that went against that higher purpose was not protected by the laws of friendship. But in the high-stakes world of medieval politics, was this ideal of absolute trust ever truly achievable? How did a person test a friend to see if they were trustworthy before confiding in them? And what happened when the duty of moral correction clashed with personal safety? If your friend, a powerful lord, confided in you a plan that was sinful but would benefit you both, what was the safe or right thing to do? Number 2, what was the difference between a friend and a lover? In the High Middle Ages, a new and powerful idea of love swept through the courts of Europe: courtly love. This was the romantic, often adulterous devotion of a knight to a highborn lady. It was a love filled with passion, longing, and secrecy. It was celebrated in the songs of the troubadours and the romances of writers like Chrétien de Troyes. So how did this powerful new model of love relate to the older ideal of friendship? The writers on friendship were very careful to draw a sharp distinction between the two. They saw courtly love, or amour, as a chaotic and dangerous force. It was based on physical desire, which they viewed as irrational and fickle. It was often secretive and adulterous, a threat to the social and religious order. It caused intense emotional suffering, jealousy, anxiety, and the pain of unfulfilled longing. While the poets might have celebrated this beautiful suffering, the moral philosophers and theologians saw it as a spiritual sickness. It was a love that distracted you from God and mired you in worldly passions. Friendship, or amicitia, was presented as its opposite. It was calm, rational, and stable. It was based not on fleeting physical attraction, but on a deep appreciation of a person's virtuous character. Its goal was not secrecy and sensual pleasure, but open communication and mutual moral improvement. While courtly love often led to irrational and even violent behavior, friendship was a source of peace, reason, and stability. It was a safe harbor in the stormy seas of human emotion. Aelred of Rievaulx is explicit about this. He warns his monks to be wary of any friendship that begins to feel too much like the passionate love described by the poets. He sees it as a corruption of true spiritual friendship. He argues that the love of friendship is chaste and ordered. It is a love of souls, not bodies. It leads you up toward God, while carnal love drags you down into sin. This created two competing ideals of intimate connection. One was passionate, romantic, and often tragic. The other was stable, spiritual, and virtuous. It's a vast oversimplification to say one was for romance and the other for friendship, because the language of love was used for both. But the key difference lay in the perceived source and goal of that love. Was it a worldly passion rooted in the senses, or a spiritual affection rooted in a shared love for God? For the thinkers we've been examining, only the second one was true, lasting, and worthy of the name of friendship. But was the reality for people on the ground always so clear-cut? Could a relationship start as a spiritual friendship and develop into a romantic love like that of Aelred and Héloïse? And did the intense emotional language used, even in spiritual friendship, sometimes create confusion or feelings that cross the strict boundaries the theologians tried to draw? How much of the danger of courtly love was a genuine moral threat, and how much was it an attempt by a male clerical elite to control the emotional lives of laypeople, especially women? Number 1, could friendship be a glimpse of heaven? We end where we began, with the highest possible view of friendship. It wasn't just a social pleasure. It wasn't just a moral support system. It wasn't even just a path to God. For some, true friendship was a direct, tangible experience of the divine. It was a little piece of heaven on earth. This is the ultimate conclusion of Aelred of Rievaulx's thought. He ends his treatise on spiritual friendship by describing a state where two friends are so perfectly united in their love for each other and their shared love for Christ, that Christ himself is present with them. In this perfect union, the friends are no longer just two individuals. They have become a sanctuary, a sacred space where the divine dwells. Their conversation becomes a form of prayer. Their mutual affection becomes a form of worship. This idea transforms friendship from a human relationship into a mystical one. It suggests that the deepest human longing for connection is at its root a longing for God. And it finds its fulfillment when a human connection becomes so pure and selfless that it becomes a channel for divine love. The joy, peace, and security you feel with a true friend is not just a psychological phenomenon. It is the joy, peace, and security of God's own presence. This was the ultimate answer to the problem of loneliness and isolation in a harsh world. In a perfect friendship, you were never alone. Your friend was with you, and God was with you both. It was a foretaste of the perfect communion of saints in heaven. The medieval world could be dark, violent, and full of suffering. But in this vision of friendship, there was a promise of a perfect, unbreakable love. It was a light in the darkness. This view makes friendship the pinnacle of human experience. It is where the human and the divine meet. It is the place where our love for another person and our love for God become one and the same. It sets an impossibly high standard, perhaps, but it also imbues our connections with a sense of profound meaning and sacredness. It tells us that when we love a friend truly and selflessly, we are doing more than just being good people. We are participating in the very life of God. We are getting a glimpse of what it will be like when all tears are wiped away and all love is made perfect. But if this is the ultimate goal, what does it mean if we never experience a friendship of this intensity and purity? Are we spiritual failures? Is this glimpse of heaven an attainable goal for ordinary people, or is it a mystical ideal reserved for a few saints and monks? And in our modern secular world, is it possible to reclaim this sense of sacredness in our friendships, or has that vision been lost to us forever?